The bullet shattered the window of the general store just as Willow Bradford bent down to retrieve a fallen bolt of fabric, the glass raining down where her head had been seconds before. And in that moment of chaos, she calculated the trajectory, the wind speed, and the exact location of the shooter with a precision that would have shocked every person in Salina, Kansas, if they had known the seamstress could do such things. It was 1876, and Willow had been hiding her intelligence for 3 years now, ever since she had arrived in this dusty town on the edge of civilization. Back in Boston, she had been studying mathematics and engineering at a private academy until her father's business collapsed, and he drank himself into an early grave. Her mother had died years before, leaving Willow alone in the world with nothing but a sharp mind and the understanding that women like her were considered unnatural, threatening, unwanted. So she had come west, taken a job as a seamstress, and learned to giggle at the appropriate moments, to ask men to explain simple things, to pretend that numbers confused her and that books gave her headaches. She had watched other women who spoke too cleverly get labeled as troublemakers or old maids, and she had decided that survival meant silence. The shooting outside continued, and Willow stayed low, her heart pounding not from fear but from the effort of suppressing her instincts to analyze and act. The other women in the store screamed and huddled together. Mrs. Henderson clutched her daughter and sobbed. Miss Patricia fainted onto a pile of flour sacks. Then the door burst open, and a man strode in with his gun drawn, his eyes scanning the room with the quick assessment of someone who knew danger intimately. Willow recognized him as Yates Lawson, one of the ranch hands who worked at the double bar spread north of town. He was tall, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of winter sky. She had seen him in town before but had never spoken to him. "Everyone stay down," he said, his voice calm and commanding. "The Barker gang is robbing the bank. This should be over soon." The women whimpered and cried, but Willow found herself studying Yates instead of cowering. He moved with efficiency and intelligence, positioning himself where he could see both the door and the back entrance, keeping his body between the women and potential danger. Most men would have rushed out to join the fight or hidden to save themselves. He was doing neither, simply standing guard with patient competence. The gunfire outside intensified, then suddenly stopped. Voices shouted and boots thundered past on the wooden sidewalk. After several long minutes, Sheriff Dawson appeared in the doorway. "All clear," he announced. "We got 2 of them and the rest rode off. Nobody killed, thank the Lord, though the bank took some damage." The women began to stir and chatter, their fear transforming into excited gossip about the attempted robbery. Willow stood and brushed the dust and glass from her simple brown dress, keeping her expression appropriately shaken but not too composed. Yates holstered his gun and turned to survey the women, checking for injuries. When his eyes met Willow's, something flickered in his gaze, a moment of recognition or curiosity that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "You all right, miss?" he asked, stepping closer. "Yes, thank you," she said, making her voice breathy and soft the way she had practiced. "That was so frightening. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been here." She saw something change in his expression, a slight disappointment perhaps, though he covered it quickly with a polite nod. "Just doing what needed doing," he said, then tipped his hat and left. Willow watched him go, feeling an unfamiliar twist of regret in her chest. For just a moment, she had wanted to speak to him as herself, to ask him about his tactical thinking, to discuss the angles and risks. But she pushed the feeling down and returned to helping Mrs. Henderson calm her daughter. The days that followed the attempted robbery brought heightened tension to Salina. The Barker gang was known throughout Kansas and the neighboring territories for their violence and audacity. That they had struck in broad daylight suggested they were growing bolder, and many feared they would return. Willow continued her work at the dress shop, hemming skirts and taking in waists, smiling and nodding as the other women gossiped about the robbery and the handsome cowboy who had protected them. She learned that Yates Lawson was 26, had come to Kansas from Texas 2 years ago, and was known as one of the most reliable hands on any ranch in the county. He was quiet, kept to himself, and rarely came to town except for supplies. "Such a shame he is so withdrawn, Mrs. Henderson said one afternoon as Willow fitted her for a new dress. "A man like that should have a wife and family, but he hardly looks at the young ladies who try to catch his eye." "Maybe he is just particular," Willow suggested, pinning the hem carefully. "Particular or peculiar, Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "I heard he reads books, not the Bible, mind you, but actual books about history and science and such. What does a cowboy need with that kind of learning?" Willow's hand stilled for just a moment before she forced herself to continue pinning. A cowboy who read about science and history. The information lodged in her mind like a burr, impossible to ignore. That Sunday, she saw him at church. He sat in the back row alone, his hat resting on his knee. Willow sat with the other unmarried women, pretending to listen to Reverend Thompson's sermon about the virtues of obedience and humility. But her mind wandered, calculating the weight-bearing capacity of the church's wooden beams and wondering if they had been properly treated to prevent rot in the Kansas humidity. After the service, there was a social gathering in the churchyard. The women had brought food, and the men stood in clusters discussing weather and cattle prices. Willow helped serve lemonade, smiling and chatting about nothing of consequence. She was pouring a glass for old Mr. Peterson when she overheard a conversation nearby. A group of men were discussing the best route for a cattle drive to Dodge City, and they were getting the geography completely wrong. They were planning to go through a stretch of territory that Willow knew from her extensive reading was currently suffering from drought, with water sources miles apart. Cattle would die, men would suffer, and the whole enterprise would likely fail. She bit her tongue and kept pouring lemonade. It was not her place to say anything. Men did not appreciate being corrected by women, especially not in public, especially not about matters they considered their domain. But then she heard Yates Lawson's voice, quiet but firm. "That route will not work. The Cimarron crossing is dry this time of year. You will need to go north through Fort Larned instead." The other men turned to him with skepticism. "How would you know?" one of them challenged. "You have not been here that long." "I raid," Yates said simply. "The Army posts regular reports about conditions on the trails. Fort Larned publishes them monthly. Last report showed good water north, dry riverbeds south." The men grumbled, but could not argue with documented information. They shifted the conversation, and Willow found herself watching Yates with new interest. He had not asserted his knowledge with arrogance or dominance. He had simply stated facts and let them speak for themselves. She made a decision that was either brave or foolish. She could not tell which. Carrying the lemonade pitcher, she walked over to where Yates stood at the edge of the gathering, slightly apart from the other men. "Would you like some lemonade, Mr. Lawson?" she asked, keeping her voice sweet and simple. He looked at her with those winter sky eyes, and again she saw that flicker of something, curiosity or assessment. "Thank you, Miss Bradford." She poured him a glass, their fingers brushing briefly as he took it. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her hand. "That was very clever of you," she said, then immediately wanted to bite her tongue. Clever was not a word a simple seamstress should use. "I mean very smart, about the route, the cattle route." "You were listening to that?" he asked, and there was no condescension in his tone, only genuine interest. "I was nearby," she said, making herself giggle nervously. "Though I confess I did not understand most of it, all those places and directions." He studied her for a long moment, and Willow had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see straight through her act to the calculating mind beneath. "Geography can be confusing," he said finally, though his tone suggested he did not quite believe she was confused at all. Before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson called her away to help with the food tables, and the moment was lost. But for the rest of the afternoon, Willow found herself aware of exactly where Yates was standing, who he was talking to, and how often he glanced in her direction. The following weeks brought a strange dance between them. Yates began coming to town more often, always with some practical errand as an excuse. He needed supplies or had to speak to the banker, or was picking up mail for the ranch hands. But somehow his path always crossed Willow's, and they would exchange polite pleasantries that felt weighted with unspoken things. Willow found herself looking forward to these encounters, even as she maintained her careful facade. She would ask him simple questions about the weather or the latest town gossip, and he would answer with patience, never making her feel stupid even though she was pretending to be. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something between puzzlement and fascination. One hot afternoon in July, Willow was at the general store buying thread when a commotion erupted outside. She stepped onto the sidewalk to see a wagon overturned in the street, its contents spilled everywhere. The driver, a young farmer named Matthew, was frantically trying to gather up dozens of wooden crates while his horse stamped nervously in its traces. "I need to get these to the train station by 3 o'clock, Matthew was saying desperately to anyone who would listen. "It is medical supplies for the army fort, and if they miss this train, men could die waiting for them." Several townspeople were trying to help, but they were simply grabbing crates randomly and stacking them, creating a chaotic pile that would never fit back in the wagon efficiently. Willow saw immediately what needed to happen. The crates were different sizes, and they needed to be loaded in a specific order and configuration to maximize space and maintain balance. She stood frozen, her mind screaming the solution while her mouth stayed silent. This was not her business. She was a seamstress. She did not know about wagon loading and spatial mathematics, except she did know, and men might die if these supplies did not get through. Then Yates appeared, having apparently been at the saddler's shop across the street. He assessed the situation quickly, then began directing the helpers with calm authority. "Stack the largest crates as a base along the sides," he said. "That will give us stability. Medium crates in the middle, smallest wedged in the gaps. We need to distribute weight evenly, or the wagon will list going around corners." Willow watched him work, organizing the chaos into order with the same efficiency she would have used, but he was making one mistake. He was placing 2 heavy crates on the same side near the back, which would create an imbalance that could cause problems if the wagon had to stop suddenly on a slope. She should say nothing. She should walk back into the store and let the men handle it. But then she thought of soldiers waiting for medical supplies, of men who might suffer because she was too afraid to speak up. She thought of Yates reading army reports, of the quiet intelligence in his eyes, of how he had never once made her feel less than, even when she was pretending to be. She stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice stronger than usual. "Those 2 heavy crates on the right should be separated. Put one on the left side instead toward the front. Otherwise the weight distribution will cause the wagon to pull right on hills." Every person stopped and stared at her. Matthew looked confused, The other helpers looked skeptical, but Yates turned to her with sudden, complete attention. "What do you mean?" he asked, and there was no mockery in the question. Willow felt her cheeks burn, but she had started this, and she could not take it back now. "The center of gravity will be off. You have approximately 200 pounds on the right rear quarter and only about 100 on the left. On a downhill slope, the momentum will pull the wagon right. On a sharp turn, it could tip." The men stared at her as if she had suddenly begun speaking Chinese, but Yates looked at the wagon, at the crates, then at her. "She is right," he said quietly. Then louder, "She is absolutely right. Move that crate to the left front." The men obeyed, more out of surprise than conviction. But once the crate was moved, even they could see how the wagon settled more evenly on its wheels. They finished loading quickly after that, and Matthew drove off with effusive thanks, making his deadline with minutes to spare. The crowd dispersed, returning to their business with much muttering and sideways glances at Willow. She stood on the sidewalk, feeling exposed and foolish, wondering what she had just done to her carefully constructed disguise. Then Yates was beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That was impressive." "I should not have said anything," Willow replied, her heart hammering. "It was not my place." "Your place?" He turned to face her fully. "Miss Bradford, you potentially saved that young man from an accident and ensured soldiers get the medicine they need. That seems like exactly your place to me." She looked up at him, searching his face for sarcasm or judgment, but found only sincerity. "Most men do not appreciate women who speak out of turn," she said carefully. "Then most men are fools," he replied. "Walk with me." It was not proper, not without a chaperone, but Willow found herself nodding. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, away from the main street toward the quieter edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. "You have been hiding," Yates said after a moment. It was not a question. Willow considered denying it, but something about his tone made lying impossible. "Yes." "Why?" "Because women who are too smart make people uncomfortable. They do not get hired. They do not get married. They get called unnatural or unwomanly. They end up alone." The words spilled out before she could stop them, 3 years of suppression breaking through her careful control. Yates was quiet for a long moment. They had reached the edge of town now, where a lone cottonwood tree offered shade. He stopped and turned to face her. "I have been watching you," he said, and Willow's breath caught. "These past weeks, I have been trying to reconcile the woman who asks simple questions about the weather with the woman who knew exactly where that shooter was positioned during the robbery." "I did not." "You did. I saw you look directly at the Miller warehouse roof the second after the shot. You knew. And just now you calculated weight distribution and momentum in your head faster than I could have done with pencil and paper." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Your mind captivates me." Willow felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "What?" "Your mind," he repeated, stepping closer. "The real one that you have been hiding. It captivates me. I have never met a woman like you, and if I am honest, I have never met a man like you either. The way you think, the things you notice and understand, it is extraordinary." "You should not say such things," Willow whispered, but she could not make herself step away from him. "People will think you are strange for admiring such qualities in a woman. Let them think what they want." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I spent too many years pretending to be dumber than I am, acting like all I care about is cattle and cards and whiskey. When I came west, I decided I would not hide anymore. I would read what I wanted, learn what interested me, and if people thought I was peculiar, so be it. But then I met you, and I realized you were doing exactly what I had escaped from, hiding your light because the world told you it was too bright." Willow felt tears prick her eyes. It is different for women. I know, he said gently. I know it is harder and more dangerous for you. But seeing you pretend to be less than you are, watching that brilliant mind forced into a tiny box to make other people comfortable, it breaks my heart. You do not even know me, she said, but it was a weak protest. Then let me know you, the real you. Not the performance you put on for everyone else. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Willow, I am not asking you to announce yourself to the whole town. I am just asking you to be yourself with me. No more hiding, no more pretending. Just you, exactly as you are. She looked down at their joined hands, at this cowboy who read army reports and calculated cattle routes, who saw through her disguise and valued what he found underneath. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. What if you decide you do not like the real me? She asked quietly. He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. Willow, I already like the real you. That is the point. Every glimpse I have caught of your actual mind has fascinated me more. I want more of those glimpses. I want all of them. She made a decision then, standing in the shade of that cottonwood tree on the edge of Salina, Kansas, with the prairie wind carrying the scent of grass and distance. She would trust this man who valued her mind, who saw her intelligence as captivating rather than threatening. I was studying advanced mathematics in Boston, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Calculus and engineering principles. I can calculate load weights and structural integrity in my head. I have read Darwin and Newton, and every book on natural philosophy I could get my hands on. I memorized the position of every major town and fort between here and both coasts. I know the Latin names for most local plants and the geological composition of Kansas soil layers. I taught myself basic surveying from a manual I found in my father's office, and I can estimate distances by triangulation using nothing but my eyes and simple arithmetic. She stopped, breathless, waiting for him to pull away or look at her with the discomfort she had seen in so many other faces. Instead, Yates smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. See, he said, captivating. They began meeting regularly after that, always with the appearance of propriety but with a new honesty between them. Yates would come to town on his days off, and they would walk together or sit on the bench outside the church, talking about everything and nothing. Willow discovered that Yates had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, the son of a schoolteacher mother who had insisted he learn to read and think, not just rope and ride. His father had died when he was young, and his mother had struggled to keep the ranch going while educating her son. She had died of fever when Yates was 20, leaving him alone but with a deep appreciation for learning and the understanding that intelligence came in many forms. He had drifted north after her death, working various ranches, always reading and studying in his spare time. He told Willow about teaching himself basic astronomy by watching the stars during night watches, about learning animal medicine from a Cheyenne ranch hand who had taken pity on his ignorance, about studying weather patterns because understanding them could mean the difference between a successful drive and disaster. I never understood why people think you have to choose between working with your hands and working with your mind, he said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky red and gold. The best cowboys I have known could do both. They understood animal behavior and weather systems. They could calculate how much water a herd needed and plan routes around terrain features. Intelligence makes you better at everything, including cowboy work. Willow told him about her studies in Boston, about the private academy that had grudgingly allowed female students, but made it clear they were peculiar exceptions. She told him about her father's collapse into drink after his business failed, about coming west with nothing but her sewing skills and her determination to survive. "I thought I would have to hide forever," she admitted. "I thought being smart was something I had to apologize for, to bury so deep no one would ever see it." "Never apologize for being brilliant," Yates said firmly. "The world needs more smart people, not fewer, and anyone who cannot see your value is blind." Their relationship deepened through the summer. They were careful to maintain appearances in public, with Willow still playing her role as the simple seamstress and Yates the quiet cowboy. But in their private moments, they were completely themselves, discussing everything from astronomy to literature to the political situation in Washington. Yates brought her books from his collection, rare treasures in this frontier town. Willow devoured them, reading by candlelight in her small room above the dress shop. She brought him her observations about the town and its people, the things she noticed that others missed. "Mrs. Henderson is embezzling from the church fund," she told him one day in August. "She is buying fabric from me that she could never afford on her husband's salary, and she has been volunteering to count the collection every Sunday." "How did you figure that out?" Yates asked, impressed. "Math," Willow said with a slight smile. "Her husband makes about $60 a month. After expenses for food, rent, and their daughter's school fees, they should have maybe $5 left. But she just bought 8 yards of silk at 50 cents a yard, plus trim and buttons. That is well over her budget, and she paid cash. The only cash she handles regularly is the church collection." "We should tell someone," Yates said, "who would believe me. A woman pointing fingers at a pillar of the community. They would say I was being catty or trying to make trouble." Willow sighed. "That is another reason I hide. Women who notice too much and speak up about it get dismissed or worse." Yates took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar between them. "I believe you, and I will find a way to mention my suspicions to the Reverend, man to man. He will believe another man more readily, which is unjust but useful in this case." And he did, approaching Reverend Thompson with carefully worded concerns about proper financial oversight. An audit was conducted, the embezzlement discovered, and Mrs. Henderson quietly left town with her family in disgrace. Willow felt a grim satisfaction, but also sadness that her cleverness had to work through a male intermediary to be effective. As summer turned toward autumn, Willow realized she was falling in love. It crept up on her gradually, in the way her heart lifted when she saw Yates riding into town, in how she saved interesting observations to share with him, in the dreams she was beginning to have about a future that seemed impossible but desperately wanted. She thought Yates might feel the same, but he had not said anything directly, and she was too afraid to ask. What if she was misreading his interest? What if he valued her mind but did not want anything more? Then, in late September, the Barker gang returned. They rode into Salina on a Thursday afternoon, 6 men on lathered horses, their intentions clear from the guns in their hands. The town had grown complacent in the months since the last attempted robbery, and the gang took advantage, hitting the bank hard and fast. Willow was at the general store when the shooting started. This time she did not hesitate, did not wait for someone else to take charge. She immediately assessed the situation, noted that the gang was positioned poorly with their backs to the open street, and realized that a single shooter in the right position could pin them down until reinforcements arrived. She ran to the back of the store and climbed the stairs to the storage room above, ignoring the startled shouts of the shopkeeper. There was a window facing Main Street with a perfect view of the bank. She pushed it open and looked around frantically for something, anything she could use. There, a pile of cast iron pans waiting to be priced and shelved. They were heavy, and if thrown with the right trajectory, they could make enough noise and distraction to disrupt the gang's coordination. Willow calculated angles and timing, then began throwing pans toward the gang's horses. She was not trying to hit anyone, just to create chaos. The first pan clanged off the hitching post with a tremendous noise. The second landed in the dirt near the horses, causing them to spook and pull at their reins. The third actually struck one of the horses in the hindquarters, not hard enough to injure but enough to send it rearing and bucking. The gang's carefully planned retreat dissolved into confusion as their horses panicked. Men shouted and grabbed for reins. In that moment of distraction, the town's defenders rallied. Sheriff Dawson and several armed citizens, including Yates, opened fire from covered positions. The gunfight was brief and decisive. 2 gang members were shot trying to control their horses. 3 more surrendered when they realized escape was impossible. The last one made a run for it on foot and was tackled by Yates in front of the saloon. Willow watched from her window, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Then she saw Yates look up, searching the buildings, and his eyes found hers through the open window. Even at that distance, she could see the understanding in his expression. He knew what she had done. She climbed down the stairs on shaking legs and emerged onto the sidewalk, just as the sheriff was hauling the last gang member to the jail. The street was full of excited townspeople, everyone talking at once about the attempted robbery and their unlikely victory. Yates made his way through the crowd toward her. His shirt was torn and dusty, and there was a cut on his cheek, but his eyes were bright with admiration. "That was you," he said quietly when he reached her. "The pans. That was you." Willow glanced around nervously, but no one was paying attention to them in the general excitement. "I just threw some things. It was probably not even helpful." "It was everything," Yates said intensely. "You disrupted their escape route at exactly the right moment. Without that, they might have gotten away and people could have been killed chasing them. You saved lives today, Willow. Please do not tell anyone," she said urgently. "If people knew, if they thought I was interfering in men's business, getting involved in violence, I will not tell," he promised. "But Willow, you should not have to hide this. You should be celebrated, not forced into silence." Before she could respond, they were swept up in the aftermath. The sheriff wanted statements. The banker wanted to thank everyone who had helped. Reverend Thompson appeared to pray over the wounded gang members before they were locked up. It was hours before the excitement died down and the town began to return to normal. That evening, after a hurried supper, Willow sat in her small room feeling restless and unsettled. The day's events had shaken something loose in her, some determination or recklessness she could not quite name. She had acted without thinking, using her intelligence and quick assessment to make a real difference. And it had felt right in a way that years of pretending and hiding never had. A soft knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Yates standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "This is not proper," she said, but she stepped back to let him in anyway. Propriety seemed less important than it had a few hours ago. "I know," he said, "but I had to see you to talk to you." He moved into the small room, which felt even smaller with his presence filling it. "Willow, I cannot keep doing this." Her heart sank. "Doing what? Pretending that I am content to just be your friend, pretending that I do not want more." He set his hat on her small table and took her hands in his. "Today, when those men were shooting and I did not know if you were safe, I realized I could not wait anymore. I could not keep my feelings to myself out of caution or propriety or fear." "What feelings?" Willow whispered, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. "I love you," Yates said simply. "I love your brilliant mind and your cautious heart. I love how you see patterns no one else notices and solve problems no one else can. I love your courage and your vulnerability, your strength and your gentleness. I love that you trust me enough to be yourself, no hiding, no pretending. I love every part of you, Willow Bradford, and I want to spend the rest of my life letting you be exactly who you are. Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks. I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid you did not feel the same, afraid that even you might eventually decide I am too strange, too difficult. He kissed her, cutting off her words with lips that were gentle and insistent at once. Willow melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as he wrapped his arms around her waist. The kiss was everything she had dreamed of and more, full of promise and passion, and the joy of being fully known and fully loved. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because it is proper or expected, but because I want to wake up next to you every morning and hear your thoughts about everything under the sun. Because I want to bring you books and watch your eyes light up. Because I want to build a life where you never have to hide, where your intelligence is celebrated and used and valued the way it should be." "Yes," Willow said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the little church in Salina, with half the town in attendance. Willow wore a dress she had made herself, simple but elegant, and carried wildflowers that Yates had ridden out to pick that morning. She walked down the aisle alone, having no family, but she did not feel alone. She felt free. The townspeople expected the marriage to be conventional, the seamstress wedding the quiet cowboy, both settling into expected roles. But Yates and Willow had other plans. Yates had saved his wages carefully for years, and combined with Willow's own modest savings, they had enough to make a down payment on a small piece of land south of town. It was not much, just 40 acres of prairie grass and a creek that ran year-round, but it was theirs. They built a house together that first autumn, Willow drawing up plans that maximized space and light while accounting for Kansas wind and weather. The local carpenter was skeptical of her designs until Yates quietly insisted they be followed. The resulting house was small but beautifully proportioned, with large windows for reading and a porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. Yates continued working at the Double Bar Ranch, but now he was saving toward buying cattle of their own. Willow took in sewing work, but began to reduce her hours, using her free time to read and study and learn. The town gossips whispered that it was strange. A woman who seemed to have influence over her husband's decisions, who was seen reading thick books on the porch and discussing business matters as if she understood them. But Yates and Willow did not care. They had each other, and they had the freedom to be themselves. One evening in December, as they sat by their fire with snow falling softly outside, Willow looked up from the book she was reading. "I have been thinking," she said. "Dangerous occupation," Yates teased, and she threw a cushion at him. "I am serious. I have been thinking about the school situation here. The children only go through 8th grade, and the teacher, Miss Abernathy, knows very little about mathematics or science. The boys especially are not being prepared for anything beyond basic farm work." "What are you proposing?" Yates asked, setting aside his own book. "I could teach," Willow said. "Not officially, perhaps, but I could offer tutoring, extra lessons for anyone interested in advanced subjects. I could teach mathematics, basic engineering principles, natural philosophy. There must be children here with curious minds who want to learn more." Yates smiled. "I think that is a wonderful idea. Though I suspect you will meet resistance from parents who think such subjects are unnecessary or inappropriate." "Let them resist," Willow said with newfound confidence. I am tired of hiding what I know. If I can help even one child understand the beauty of mathematics or the logic of science, it will be worth the gossip." She started slowly, mentioning her offer to a few select families. To her surprise, several parents were interested. The blacksmith wanted his son to learn engineering principles to improve his metalwork. The surveyor's daughter showed aptitude for mathematics and wanted to go beyond what Miss Abernathy could teach. Even the doctor's wife brought her 2 children, hoping they might follow their father into medicine someday. Within months, Willow had a small but dedicated group of students who came to her house twice a week for lessons. She taught them algebra and geometry, basic physics and chemistry, using practical examples from frontier life. She showed the blacksmith's son how to calculate tensile strength and heat distribution. She taught the surveyor's daughter advanced mathematics by applying it to land measurement problems. She engaged the doctor's children with anatomy and biological sciences. Word spread, and while some townspeople muttered about women overstepping their bounds, others began to see value in what Willow offered. The children she taught performed better in their regular schoolwork. The blacksmith's son created a new design for horseshoes that sold well. The surveyor's daughter began helping her father with complex calculations, making his work faster and more accurate. Yates watched his wife flourish with pride and love. This was the Willow she was meant to be, brilliant and confident, using her gifts to help others instead of hiding them away. He encouraged her, protected her when necessary, and celebrated every small victory. Their first winter together was hard in some ways, with cold winds and isolation, but rich in others. They talked for hours by the fire, shared their dreams and fears, made love with the passion of 2 people who had finally found their perfect match. Willow had never been happier, never felt more herself. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. Yates bought their first cattle, 10 head to start their own small herd. Willow helped him plan the grazing rotation and water management, applying principles she had read about to their specific land conditions. They worked side by side, building fences and checking livestock, 2 partners in every sense. One warm afternoon in May, Willow was teaching a lesson on basic astronomy to her students, using a model she had constructed from wire and paper, when Sheriff Dawson appeared at her door. "Sorry to interrupt, Miss Willow," he said, hat in hand, "but I need to borrow your husband if he is around." Yates had been working in the barn. He came in at the sheriff's call, wiping his hands on his pants. "What is the trouble, Sheriff? We have got a situation at the Hendricks farm. Their well has collapsed, and they are saying the whole thing needs to be rebuilt. But old Hendricks cannot afford to hire it done, and I am not sure any of us know how to do it right. I thought maybe you might have some ideas, seeing as you know about such things." Yates glanced at Willow, and she saw the question in his eyes. She made a quick decision. "I will come too," she said. "Just let me dismiss my students." The sheriff looked uncertain. "Well, I suppose that would be all right, though I am not sure what help she knows about engineering and structural integrity," Yates said firmly. "If anyone can figure out how to rebuild that well safely, it is Willow." They rode out to the Hendricks farm, a poor homestead about 5 miles from town. The well had indeed collapsed. The wooden supports rotted through and the whole shaft caved in. Mrs. Hendricks was near tears, and their 3 young children looked frightened. "We cannot survive without a well," Mr. Hendricks said desperately. "But I do not have money to hire a proper crew, and I am afraid if I try to dig it out myself, the whole thing will come down and kill me." Willow examined the site carefully, noting the soil composition, the water table depth based on the original well's measurements, and the structural failures that had caused the collapse. She asked questions about the water flow patterns, the history of the well, and the materials available. Then she sketched out a plan in the dirt with a stick, showing how to shore up the shaft with a different support system, how to angle the dig to avoid unstable soil layers, and how to line the well to prevent future collapses. "You will need sturdy timber here and here," she explained, pointing to her rough diagram. "Cut cedar if you can get it. It resists rot better in wet conditions. Layer the stones in this pattern for maximum stability. And dig at a slight angle to avoid this clay layer that is likely holding water and causing instability." Mr. Hendricks stared at the diagram, then at Willow. "How do you know all this?" "I read," Willow said simply, "and I understand structural engineering." Over the next week, Yates and several other men from town helped Hendricks rebuild the well following Willow's design. She visited the site daily to check their progress and make adjustments as needed. When they hit the water table and the well began flowing clear and strong, Mr. Hendricks shook Willow's hand with tears in his eyes. "You saved my family," he said. "I do not care what the gossips say. You are a genius and I am grateful." Word of the successful well project spread through the county. Other farmers began consulting Willow about various technical problems. She helped design a better irrigation system for one homestead, figured out why another family's barn kept losing its roof in storms and how to fix it, and diagnosed a mysterious illness in a herd of cattle that turned out to be mineral deficiency in their grazing land. Some people, especially some of the older men in town, grumbled about a woman doing such work, but the practical results were hard to argue with. Willow solved problems, saved people money, and prevented disasters through the application of knowledge and intelligence. Gradually, reluctantly, the town began to accept that the quiet seamstress was also an engineer, teacher, and problem solver. Yates watched his wife gain confidence and recognition with deep satisfaction. This was what he had wanted for her, the freedom to use her gifts without fear or hiding. They were building something together, a life that defied conventional roles but worked perfectly for them. In the summer of 1877, Willow discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted a family with Yates, wanted to bring children into the world who would be raised to value intelligence and curiosity, regardless of gender. But she feared pregnancy would force her back into a purely domestic role, that she would lose the intellectual freedom she had fought so hard to claim. Yates dispelled her fears the moment she told him. "This changes nothing about who you are," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "You will be a mother, yes, but you will also still be a teacher and engineer, a brilliant mind that the world needs. We will figure out how to balance everything, together." And they did. Willow continued teaching through her pregnancy, though she reduced her more physically demanding consultation work in the later months. Yates took on extra responsibilities around their small ranch and with her students, proving himself a capable assistant teacher when needed. Their son was born in March of 1878, during a late-season snowstorm that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Willow labored through a long night with only Yates to help her, the midwife unable to reach them through the drifts. It was terrifying and exhausting, but when she finally held her baby boy in her arms, with Yates beside her looking awed and proud, she felt complete in a way she never had before. They named him Thomas, after Willow's father, hoping the name might redeem some of the sadness of her past. Tommy grew quickly, a healthy baby with his mother's dark eyes and his father's easy temperament. Yates proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Tommy during colicky nights, changing diapers without complaint, and singing soft cowboy ballads to lull his son to sleep. Willow returned to teaching when Tommy was 2 months old, bringing him with her to lessons. Her students adored the baby, and the older girls helped watch him while Willow taught. It was unconventional, but it worked. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered modestly, never making them wealthy but providing a comfortable living. Willow's teaching expanded to include adult students, men and women who wanted to learn practical mathematics for business or engineering for building projects. She charged small fees for her instruction, money that went into savings for Tommy's future. Yates became foreman at the Double Bar Ranch, a position that recognized his skill and intelligence. He still rayed voraciously, sharing interesting discoveries with Willow in their evening conversations. They remained intellectual partners as much as romantic ones, challenging and stimulating each other's minds. In 1880, Willow gave birth to twin daughters, Anna and Caroline. The pregnancy was harder than the first, and the birth complicated by the twins' positioning, but both babies arrived healthy after an arduous labor. Yates held his daughters with the same tender devotion he had shown Tommy, and their son, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his tiny sisters. The house felt crowded with 3 small children, but it was a happy chaos. Tommy inherited his mother's curiosity and his father's patience, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. The twins were too young yet to show their personalities fully, but they were alert and active. Watching everything with bright eyes, Willow cut back on her teaching temporarily, focusing on her babies while they were so young. But she still consulted on engineering problems and still read every book she could get her hands on. Yates built her a small study off their bedroom, a space just for her where she could think and work when the household noise became too much. One evening in late 1880, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Yates took Willow's hand. "Do you remember that day under the cottonwood tree?" he asked. "When I told you your mind captivated me." "Of course," Willow said. "It was the day my life truly began. I have been thinking about that word, captivate. I meant it then, but I understand it better now." He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "Your mind does not just interest me or impress me. It genuinely captivates me, holds me in thrall. I could listen to you explain mathematical proofs or engineering principles for hours and never grow bored. I am captivated by how you see the world, by the connections you make that no one else sees. After 5 years together, I am more captivated than ever." Willow felt tears prick her eyes. "You gave me the courage to stop hiding. You taught me that being intelligent is not something to apologize for." "You taught yourself that," Yates corrected gently. "I just loved you enough to show you it was safe. You did the brave part." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, their children's laughter providing a joyful soundtrack. It was a moment of perfect contentment, the kind that comes from being exactly where you are meant to be with exactly who you are meant to be with. The next few years brought both challenges and triumphs. A drought in 1881 tested their ranching skills and required all of Willow's water management knowledge to keep their cattle alive. She designed a system of small reservoirs that captured spring runoff and distributed it through the dry months, a system that worked so well that other ranchers copied it. In 1883, the railroad extended a line closer to Salina, bringing new economic opportunities, but also new people and changing social dynamics. Willow was asked to serve as a technical consultant for the railroad on bridge construction and grade calculations, a position that caused some controversy, but which she handled with competence and professionalism. Tommy started school in 1884, thriving under Miss Abernathy's basic instruction, but clearly needing more challenge. Willow began teaching him advanced subjects at home, and Yates worked with him on practical skills like ranching and horsemanship. Their son was bright and curious, showing early signs of inheriting his parents' intellectual abilities. The twins developed distinct personalities as they grew. Anna was quieter, thoughtful, preferring books and puzzles. Caroline was energetic and bold, always climbing trees and catching frogs. Willow and Yates encouraged both girls equally, never limiting them based on outdated ideas about feminine behavior. In 1885, Willow was approached by the Territorial Education Board about writing a mathematics textbook for frontier schools. They had heard of her teaching methods and practical applications, and they wanted to provide better resources for rural students. Willow accepted the commission, working on the manuscript in the evenings after the children were in bed. The process took 2 years, during which Willow drew on all her teaching experience to create a textbook that was rigorous but accessible, theoretical but grounded in practical examples from frontier life. When Bradford's Practical Mathematics for Western Schools was published in 1887, it was met with enthusiastic reception from teachers and students throughout the territory. Seeing her name in print, her ideas and methods preserved and distributed to help countless students, filled Willow with profound satisfaction. This was what she had dreamed of back in Boston before her father's death and her flight west. But this was better, because she had created it on her own terms, not by hiding who she was but by embracing it. Yates celebrated the book's publication by buying Willow a beautiful new microscope from a catalog, an extravagant gift they could barely afford, but which he insisted she deserved. She spent hours examining plant specimens and pond water, making detailed sketches and notes, teaching the children about the invisible world of tiny organisms. In 1888, their fourth and final child was born, another son they named James. He arrived quickly and easily compared to the earlier births, as if eager to join the boisterous household. At 32, Willow felt complete in her family. 4 children seemed like exactly the right number, enough to fill the house with noise and love, but not so many that she and Yates were overwhelmed. Tommy was now 10, responsible and mature beyond his years. He helped with the younger children and showed a real aptitude for mathematics and engineering. Willow dreamed of him perhaps attending university someday, something that seemed more possible now with her textbook royalties providing a steady supplemental income. The twins, at 8 years old, were inseparable despite their different temperaments. Anna had begun helping Willow with teaching, showing a talent for explaining concepts to younger students. Caroline had declared her intention to be a veterinarian, a profession that barely existed but which she was determined to invent if necessary. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper modestly. Willow's teaching and consulting work kept her intellectually engaged. Yates divided his time between the Double Bar Ranch and their own growing herd. The children thrived, healthy and happy and curious about the world. The town of Salina had grown over the years, evolving from a rough frontier settlement into a proper town with a bank, 2 churches, multiple stores, and even a small lending library that Willow had helped establish. The old prejudices against educated women had not disappeared entirely, but they had softened, worn down by Willow's consistent competence, and the undeniable benefits her knowledge brought to the community. In 1890, when Willow was 34 and Yates 36, they celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary with a rare evening alone. The older children were at a friend's house, and the younger 2 were asleep. They sat on their porch under a blanket of stars, holding hands and reflecting on the life they had built. "You ever regret it?" Willow asked. "Marrying someone so unconventional, you could have had a simpler life with a more traditional wife." Yates laughed. "Simpler, perhaps, but infinitely more boring. Willow, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You challenged me, inspired me, made me think harder and dream bigger. Our life together has been an adventure of the mind as much as anything else, and I would not trade that for all the simple conventionality in the world." "I was so afraid when I met you," Willow admitted. "Afraid to be myself, afraid you would reject me if you knew the real me. And instead, you saw through my disguise and loved what you found underneath. You gave me permission to be myself." "You gave yourself that permission," Yates said. "I just provided a safe place for you to do it. But Willow, you would have found your way eventually, with or without me. You are too brilliant, too determined to stay hidden forever." "Maybe," Willow conceded, "but it would have been a lonelier journey. Having you beside me, supporting me, celebrating my successes and comforting my failures, that made all the difference. You taught me that intelligence and love are not incompatible, that I did not have to choose between being smart and being happy." They kissed under the stars, 13 years of love and partnership in that gentle touch. The prairie wind carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. It was a perfect moment, crystalline and eternal. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. In 1892, Tommy left home to attend the University of Kansas, fulfilling Willow's dream of higher education for her children. He studied civil engineering, writing long letters home about his classes and professors, thanking his mother for preparing him so well that he found the coursework almost easy. The twins grew into young women, both brilliant in their own ways. Anna became an assistant teacher at the Salina School, using her mother's methods to inspire a new generation of students. Caroline apprenticed with the local veterinarian, learning animal medicine with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. James, the youngest, showed signs of inheriting his father's practical skills along with his mother's intellectual gifts. He could fix anything mechanical and loved taking things apart to understand how they worked. Yates and Willow grew older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They still talked for hours about books and ideas. They still consulted on each other's work. They still made love with passion tempered by familiarity and genuine affection. Their hair grayed and their faces lined, but their minds remained sharp and their hearts remained intertwined. In 1895, Willow published her second book, this one on practical engineering for frontier applications. It sold even better than the first, cementing her reputation as an expert in her field. She received letters from all over the West, from teachers and students and homesteaders, thanking her for making complex concepts accessible. Yates retired from the Double Bar Ranch in 1896, at the age of 46, to focus on their own land full-time. With Tommy sending money home from his engineering job in Topeka and Willow's book royalties, they were comfortable enough that Yates did not need to work for others anymore. He expanded their herd and improved their land, implementing techniques he had learned over decades of ranching. They became the couple younger people in Salina looked to for advice and wisdom. Willow mentored young women who wanted to pursue education or unconventional careers. Yates helped young men understand that intelligence and hard work were not mutually exclusive. Together, they modeled a marriage of equals, a partnership where both minds and hearts were fully engaged. In 1898, Tommy married a schoolteacher from Topeka, a young woman named Elizabeth who shared his love of learning and his progressive views. The wedding was held in Salina, a joyful gathering that brought the whole community together. Willow watched her son pledge his life to an educated, independent woman and felt profound satisfaction. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and her son was part of that change. The twins both married within a year of each other, Anna to a fellow teacher and Caroline to another veterinarian she had met at a professional conference in Kansas City. Both women negotiated marriages where they could continue their careers, where their intelligence was valued rather than feared. Willow saw in her daughters' lives the freedom she had fought so hard to claim for herself, now becoming more normal and accepted. James, at 17, was preparing to follow his brother to university. He wanted to study mechanical engineering, fascinated by the new technologies emerging at the turn of the century. As the 19th century drew to a close, Willow and Yates found themselves increasingly alone in their house that had once been so full of children's voices. It was a bittersweet transition, pride in their children's successful launches into the world mixed with the quiet that came from empty bedrooms, but they had each other, and that had always been enough. They still took evening walks. They still read to each other by firelight. They still challenged each other with puzzles and problems. They still made each other laugh. The core of their relationship, intellectual partnership and deep love, remained as strong as ever. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, they returned to the cottonwood tree where Yates had first told Willow her mind captivated him. The tree was older now, its branches wider, but it still stood at the edge of town, marking the boundary between civilization and wilderness. They stood in its shade, holding hands as they had 2 decades before, and reflected on the journey they had traveled together. "I have been thinking," Willow said, a phrase she had used countless times over the years. "Dangerous occupation," Yates replied with the same teasing tone he always used. "I want to write one more book, not a textbook this time. A memoir, perhaps, or at least an account of what it was like to be an educated woman in the frontier, how I hid my intelligence and what it cost me, and how you taught me I did not have to hide anymore." Yates squeezed her hand. "I think that is a wonderful idea. Your story could help other women who are hiding, show them a path forward. Will you help me write it? It is your story too, in a way, the cowboy who valued a woman's mind when the world told him not to." "I will help in any way I can," Yates promised, "though the real story is yours. I was just lucky enough to be part of it." They began working on the book that autumn, Willow writing and Yates editing, both of them pouring their experiences and insights onto the pages. It was a different kind of work than the technical textbooks, more personal and vulnerable, but also more important in some ways. Memoir of a Frontier Intellectual, One Woman's Journey from Hiding to Freedom, was published in 1899. It was controversial, with some reviewers praising its honesty and others condemning it as improper or exaggerated. But it found an audience among women who saw their own experiences reflected in Willow's story, who drew courage from her example. Letters poured in from across the country, from women who had been hiding their intelligence, who had dumbed themselves down to fit in, who had sacrificed their gifts on the altar of social acceptability. They thanked Willow for putting words to their experience, for showing them it was possible to be both intelligent and loved, both educated and feminine. Willow answered every letter personally, offering encouragement and advice. She became a symbol of what was possible for women, a pioneer not just of the geographic frontier, but of the intellectual and social frontier as well. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Willow and Yates stood on their porch watching the sunrise. They were 54 and 56 now, their children grown and launched, their work largely complete. The world was changing rapidly, with new technologies and social movements promising a future very different from the past they had lived through. "Do you think the world will be better for our grandchildren?" Willow asked. She was thinking of Tommy's new baby daughter, of the twins' future children, of James, who would surely marry someday. "I think it will be different," Yates said thoughtfully. "Better in some ways, worse in others, as change always brings both progress and loss. But I think the work we have done, you especially, has made space for more people to be fully themselves. That has to count for something." "I hope so," Willow said. "I hope our granddaughters never have to hide who they are. I hope they grow up in a world that values their minds as much as their faces, their intelligence as much as their domesticity." "They will," Yates said with confidence, "because women like you fought to make it so. Because you refused to stay hidden, even when it was hard and scary. You changed things, Willow, not just for yourself, but for everyone who came after." They spent that New Year's Day quietly, reflecting on the past and imagining the future. All four of their children came home for the occasion, bringing spouses and stories and love. The house was full again. 3 generations gathered to celebrate both the new century and the family they had built. Tommy and Elizabeth brought their daughter, little Margaret, who had her grandmother's dark eyes and curious nature. The twins both announced they were expecting, babies due in the spring and summer. James brought a young woman he was courting, a chemistry student at the university, who debated scientific theories with Willow over dinner, much to everyone's delight. Watching her family, seeing her children thriving and her grandchildren beginning their own journeys, Willow felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was her legacy, not just the books and the students and the engineering projects, but this family built on a foundation of honesty and acceptance and love. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Willow and Yates sat by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. "Thank you," Willow said quietly. "For what? For seeing me. Really seeing me, the person I was hiding. For valuing my mind when I had been taught it was a liability. For building a life with me where I could be completely myself." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture so familiar it was almost unconscious. "You changed my life, Yates. You made everything possible." "You changed your own life," Yates corrected gently. "I just loved you. That is all I ever did, Willow. I loved you exactly as you were, and I let you know it. You did all the hard work of believing me, of trusting me, of being brave enough to emerge from hiding. Never discount your own courage." "Then let us say we changed each other's lives," Willow proposed. "You gave me permission to be myself, and I gave you a partner who could match your intellect and challenge your assumptions. We made each other better." "Agreed," Yates said, kissing her hand. "We made each other better, and together we made something beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the promise of another year, another season, another chapter in the story they were writing together. The years after 1900 were gentler than those that had come before, a time of harvest after decades of planting and tending. Willow and Yates settled into a routine that suited them perfectly. They spent mornings working, Willow still consulting occasionally and corresponding with students and readers, Yates managing their ranch with the help of hired hands. Afternoons were for reading and discussing ideas. Evenings were for family when the children visited, or quiet companionship when they were alone. Grandchildren arrived regularly. Tommy and Elizabeth had 3 more children after Margaret. Anna had twin boys and then a girl. Caroline had 2 daughters who seemed determined to follow their mother into veterinary medicine. James married his chemistry student, a young woman named Sarah, and they had a son in 1903. Willow delighted in her grandchildren, teaching them the same way she had taught her own children, encouraging their curiosity and never discouraging their questions. Some of the boys showed mathematical aptitude. Some of the girls showed engineering skills, and all of them grew up believing that intelligence was something to celebrate regardless of gender. In 1905, Willow was invited to speak at the University of Kansas about her experiences as a female intellectual on the frontier. She was 60 years old, her hair completely white now but her mind as sharp as ever. Yates accompanied her to Lawrence, sitting in the front row as she addressed a packed auditorium. She spoke about hiding her intelligence, about the fear and loneliness of pretending to be less than she was. She spoke about meeting Yates, about his validation of her mind and his support of her growth. She spoke about building a life where she could be fully herself, and about the responsibility they all had to create space for others to do the same. The students gave her a standing ovation. Young women approached her afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking her for showing them what was possible. Young men shook Yates' hand, asking how he had overcome social conditioning to value a woman's intelligence. Driving home in their wagon, Willow leaned against Yates' shoulder, exhausted but satisfied. "I think we did something good," she said. "Not just for ourselves, but for others too." "We did," Yates agreed. "We proved that love and intelligence can coexist, that partnerships of equals are not just possible but beautiful. That is no small thing." They continued their quiet life in Salina, watching the world change around them. Automobiles began appearing on the streets. Electricity came to town in 1908. The population grew as the frontier closed and Kansas transformed from wild territory to established state. Through it all, Willow and Yates remained constants, their love a steady anchor in changing times. They celebrated 40 years of marriage in 1916, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. The house overflowed with family. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple who had started it all. Tommy, now 48 and a successful civil engineer, stood to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that intelligence has no gender, that love means accepting people exactly as they are, and that the most important thing in life is finding someone who sees you truly and loves what they see. Everything good in my life started with the example you set." His sisters and brother echoed the sentiment, each sharing how their parents' unconventional but deeply loving partnership had shaped their own understanding of relationships and self-worth. Willow and Yates listened with tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the evidence of lives well lived and love well shared. They had not set out to be pioneers or revolutionaries. They had simply tried to build a life where both of them could be fully themselves. That it had rippled outward, affecting children and grandchildren and readers and students, was a gift beyond anything they had imagined. In their final years together, as age slowed their bodies but not their minds, Willow and Yates continued their evening conversations, their intellectual partnership undimmed by time. They argued about politics and science, discussed books and ideas, challenged each other's assumptions and laughed at shared jokes worn smooth by decades of repetition. Yates died peacefully in his sleep in 1922, at the age of 72, with Willow beside him holding his hand. His last words were characteristic. "Still captivated," he whispered, his eyes on her face. "Still captivated by you. Willow grieved deeply but not despairingly. They had been blessed with 46 years of marriage, a lifetime of love and partnership. She had been fully known and fully loved, had lived as her complete self without hiding or pretense. That was more than most people ever got, and she was grateful for every moment. She lived another 5 years after Yates' death, sustained by children and grandchildren, by her work and her books, by the knowledge that she had lived a life true to herself. She continued teaching almost until the end, her mind sharp even as her body failed. Willow Bradford died in 1927 at the age of 71, surrounded by family in the house she and Yates had built together. Her final words were about mathematics, a proof she was working through in her head, her brilliant mind engaged until the very end. At her funeral, attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, Tommy read from her memoir, the passage where she described meeting Yates under the cottonwood tree. "He told me my mind captivated him," Tommy read, his voice breaking with emotion. "And in that moment, I began to believe that perhaps I did not have to hide anymore. Perhaps there was room in this world for a woman who thought and learned and created. Perhaps intelligence and love were not mutually exclusive. That cowboy, who saw through my disguise to the person underneath, gave me the greatest gift anyone can give another human being, the freedom to be fully myself." She was buried next to Yates on a hill overlooking their ranch, the prairie grass waving in the eternal Kansas wind. Her gravestone bore a simple inscription: Willow Bradford Lawson, 1856-1927. Teacher, author, engineer, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, her mind captivated all who knew her. The legacy they built together continued through generations. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the values of intellectual honesty, gender equality, and authentic love. Willow's books remained in print, teaching new generations of students. The engineering projects she consulted on stood as testaments to her practical genius. But perhaps the most important legacy was simpler and more personal. They had proven that a woman could be brilliant and loved, that a man could value intelligence in a partner, that two people could build a marriage of true equals and find profound happiness in it. In the Wild West of 1876, that had been revolutionary. By the time Willow died in 1927, it was becoming more common, the world slowly catching up to the vision she and Yates had lived. Their story became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren who never met them knew about the seamstress, who hid her intelligence, and the cowboy who told her mind captivated him. They knew about the love story built on intellectual partnership and mutual respect. They knew about two people who chose authenticity over conformity and found everything they needed in each other. And on warm summer evenings, when the family gathered at the old ranch that had been preserved and passed down through the generations, someone would always tell the story again. About Willow and Yates, about hiding and revelation, about a mind that captivated and a heart that understood. About love in the Wild West that was built on seeing each other truly and accepting completely. The cottonwood tree where it all began still stood at the edge of what had once been frontier and was now the thriving city of Salina, Kansas. Young couples sometimes sat in its shade, making promises and dreaming dreams. And if the wind carried whispers of an old conversation, of a cowboy telling a seamstress that her mind captivated him, of a woman learning she did not have to hide anymore, well, perhaps some love stories are powerful enough to echo through time, teaching each new generation what it means to truly see and be seen, to love and be loved, exactly as we are.